Good morning, everyone. I think I might make a start. My name is Susan Mackenzie, and this is an Insight conversation hosted by the Emergency Services Foundation. Our focus is on improving the mental health and wellbeing of people across the sector in Victoria, and never has there been a time when that need is so widespread. So in these unbelievable times and through the wonders of technology, we're all here joining this discussion from many areas of our great state. And I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands where we are. I'm on the Wurundjeri land in my dining room with my dog, and with all fingers and toes crossed that the Wi-Fi stays connected. We pay our respects to elders past and present and emerging as we discuss this really important topic today of lessons leading and loss in the aftermath of tragedy. This could be a very difficult conversation for us and for you because we've all got our own experience of tragedy. It might bring up memories and emotions, so take care while you're engaging in the conversation, and remember it's always good to talk through with someone if you need to. All of our agencies have terrific support services, and of course there's always Beyond Blue. I should say at this point that no reaction to grief and loss is right or wrong. Keep an open mind to what gets discussed today and the questions that others might raise. It's so generous of Lex de Man and Chris Hardman to be with us and to share their perspective and experience in a very personal way. I'm sure you're going to really enjoy listening to what they have to say. I've got a series of questions that I'm going to go through and facilitate with Lex and Chris. If you've got a question, please put it in the Q&A section and I will do my very best to address that. I've got a fairly comprehensive list, so hopefully I'll cover everything that you want. Also, I want to alert you to the fact that this session is being recorded. So this topic is something that I've been really interested in for a very long time because I felt there were so many learnings that just weren't being shared across the sector in dealing with the aftermath of tragedy. I was involved when 5 CFA volunteers died at Linton, and an experience that will definitely stay with me forever. I worked closely with Lex at that time, and I had the utmost respect for his leadership and felt that he had much wisdom which needed to be harnessed. Now, sadly, Lex has other experiences, all of which he's going to draw on today. Lex, you're a member of VicPol before joining CFA for 20 years, where you had various roles, leadership roles. You're still a volunteer and a group officer. You're now the CEO at Police Legacy. Can we start by asking you to please provide some context to your experience for the discussion today?
Well, good morning, Susan, and good morning to everybody that's participating in the webinar, and thank you for the opportunity. I suppose my background in policing and also in fire, very briefly, I've been through a number of what I would call traumatic experiences, and I'll just give you a very quick snapshot of that to put into context. I suppose the first one for me was in March 1983 when I was involved in a police shooting, and that had a profound impact on me and still has today every time I drive past the location where the shooting took place. And then through my policing career, I got involved in investigating a religious cult where we released a number of children and dealing with them for a period of 5 years. And through that investigation, saw a lot of trauma and saw a lot of heartache and impact on not only the survivors, but also the impact on the serving police who were part of the Operation Forest Task Force, and the mental impact that I saw in the aftermath of that investigation. And then in 98, as you mentioned, Susan, I was employed by CFA as the area manager at Geelong. And Susan's already mentioned the 5 firefighters that we lost from the Geelong West Fire Brigade. They were my people. and dealing with those families and the brigade members from Geelong West certainly opened my eyes and taught me a lot about managing grief. And then in 2009, Black Saturday, I was the regional director at that stage, a regional manager for the District 13 area of CFA, which covered the Kinglake and the Maroondah Valley type area, Yarra Valley type area. Of the 173 Victorians that passed away, 121 died in that patch. So I was dealing with around about 3,500 volunteers who were involved in the firefight plus staff. And then now in my current role at Victoria Police Legacy as the CEO, of course, been supporting and dealing with the aftermath of the tragic events of the 22nd of April of this year on the Eastern Freeway. So I've seen a fair bit of grief and managed quite a few incidents involving the impact of mental health on people.
Okay, thank you, Lex. Chris is the Chief Officer at DELWP Forest Fire. He was also heavily involved in Black Saturday. More recently, he's faced the sad events of last summer, which most people will be familiar with. But Chris, can you please remind us of some of your experience?
Sure. Look, I think these conversations are always really difficult because even for those of us, you sort of you deal with these things professionally, but it still impacts you. So but for me, I reflect back on I started a new job as the Chief Ranger for the Dandenong Rangers in 1996, and in January 1997 we had an arsonist light 5 fires on the western face of the Dandenongs, and that resulted in 3 people being killed, and that was probably a really important moment for me. It's sort of when I decided that I wanted to lean in on fire and emergency management more to see what I could do, and I sort of really launched in a senior way in the mega fires in 2002-3, again, where there were some fatalities and loss of properties. But the one for me was 2009, the Black Saturday bushfires, where I was incident controller on a Bunya Bridge track fire, which was fine because, you know, there were some devastating losses to community, and those impacts will live with that community. So that was on the day, but 9 days afterwards, I was the deputy incident controller at Kinglake for 9 days, and I was attending all of the community meetings, and sort of had this massive exposure to the aftermath directly with the affected communities. That had a really significant impact on me, and that leads to this year, 2019, where we tragically lost David Moresi, Bill Slade and Matt Kavanagh, 3 Forest Fire Management Victoria firefighters, all amazing human beings. You know, sadly, you get to know people really well after they have died and the contribution that they've made. So yeah, I think a long time dealing with, for all of us in the emergency management sector, dealing with the tragedies of losses in the community, but similarly for me as the chief, losing 3 people that will never go home again is really impactful, and yeah, really happy to share our experiences around that. So
Okay.
thanks, Susan.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you. Lex, when something like this happens, what are the stages you found yourself moving through as a leader?
Well, of course, dealing with the immediate grief, the personal grief, you know, the impact on yourself, and I found that you know, establishing in my own mind, and if I use Linton for example, okay, what needs to be done? You go automatically into crisis management mode, and you have to think of the victims, those who have lost their lives, their family members, obviously, are upper foremost in your mind, their colleagues, and those that are around you that are looking at you as a leader to actually lead. And so you go through that grief cycle at varying stages, or I found I did, but certainly the initial action that occurred with myself was what needs to be done, and it was very, how do I say, very structured insofar as this is what we need to communicate. This is how we communicate. This is the welfare support that's required. I need to get to know the families. I need to get know more about the people involved, but also about the impact of those around you and around those that have lost. So you can really formulate a plan in moving forward, because you've got to understand you're going through that grief cycle. Everybody's going through that grief cycle at that initial stage.
Mm. And I mean, it's been how long now since Linton? 22 years?
Yeah, 1998, December 98.
Yeah. And I mean, this stuff stays with you forever, doesn't it, as a leader?
Oh, it does. And, you know, I still have contact with a couple of the family members that were involved, because they've never got through it. And, you know, relationships that I built in the Geelong area with the Geelong West Fire Brigade members, a number of them I'm still close with, and also career firefighters in the Geelong area, you know, who to this day, when I meet, particularly one of them and his wife, we don't have to say anything. We just hug each other, because we know what we're both still going through. And that's about living with the reality that'll never think it'll leave you, but it's how you manage it and cope with it.
And Chris, what's it like to lead at times like this, to be a leader?
I reckon it's really hard. I found it really challenging. Certainly, I had to steel myself. I had to manage my own emotions, and I might just tell a very brief story. So I was at the State Control Centre when I was listening to the radio about what was happening directly at the scene of Matt's passing, and had this second-hand experience of the people that were there trying to look after him. And so then it became clear that Matt wasn't going home, and I had to steel myself immediately to, in the same way Lex describes, to think about exactly what needed to occur next. So in a leadership role, and my thoughts went immediately to the family and his colleagues. Matt had worked at 3 work centres at Mansfield, Alexandra, and sorry, I forget the third one, but a super a popular guy, and I knew immediately it was just going to have this devastating impact on everyone. And so I got into that command and control mode. I started to think very practically around the different things that we needed to do in that first few hours. And yeah, so that was that was what we had to do. And of course, there is a significant media interest, and preparing to make statements to the media once the notification of family had occurred, and yeah, putting in place the things necessary to give yourself some comfort that those initial things that you needed to do had been done. So an appropriate notification of the family, making sure that was done as best as possible, understanding exactly what the family needed in terms of time to notify their broader network before we publicised anything, establishing that trusted point of contact for the family, so we didn't undertake any action that would have put more distress on the family, and a range of other things which I can talk about a little bit later, but just making sure you do all of those things. But I found it really challenging, really difficult. But you do get into that. Those of us in the emergency services know how to get into that sort of focus, command and control mode, and that's what I did through those 3 deaths this year.
There's 2 things I want to comment on about that. It's interesting with the media, isn't it? I remember that night of Linton arriving back at headquarters at CFA, being faced by a helicopter crew that had landed out the front of CFA, who wanted me to tell them who these people were. And I had a blazing row with those people. And I said to them, you know, please show some respect here for everybody who's directly involved. And it was a shocking row that I had with them.
Yeah, sorry, Susan.
No, go on.
I was just going to fully agree with you. I took on the role to look after the media, so to ensure that our staff and family members were not unduly impacted. And some of the questions, so these young journalists, it's not their fault. Sometimes, you know, they would ask questions that you would struggle to answer. You know, how do the family feel about the loss? You know, and it's almost an unimaginably insensitive question that you can't answer. But so it was one of the things I had to do, was understand that the journalists were doing their job, and I had to try and be respectful, but you know, at the end of it, you sort of feel like banging your head against the wall a bit and saying, well, what the hell were they thinking? But you know, they don't know, they're not a part of it. And yeah, I found that to be challenging, but just had to, again, steel yourself for those experiences as well, dealing with the media.
The other thing I wanted to comment on, you mentioned a couple of times the term command and control. Now, one thing that we've been talking about in our learning network is this sort of tension, I suppose, between command and control and what that requires, and what it means to be an authentic leader that sort of bears all and leads in a different sort of way. And, you know, how do you balance that, Lex? Would you like to make a comment on that? How does the real Lex come through when you're also in this very command and control mindset?
I personally don't think you can actually separate them, because that's you as a leader, and it's about understanding that you have a task to do, because there are people looking at you for leadership, and they will. If they've got confidence in you as a leader, that you have an understanding of what needs to be done, and you're prepared to take advice on board from others and consider their advice, and then make decisions that are informed on the advice you've received, and not become arrogant about the decision making, but take on board as much information as you can, then I think you'll bring people along the journey with you, and you'll give them confidence at a time of high grief that they will follow you as their leader, and they will give you that license, as I would call it, to make the calls, to make the decisions, because you're showing empathy, but you're also making sound decisions, appropriate decisions, in a very timely manner. The last thing you should do is to dilly-daddle and not make a decision, because let's face it, not every decision that we all make all the time is perfectly correct, but at least make the decision from the best information you've got.
And Chris, when you're leading at a time like this, how do you support others while you're also processing and looking after yourself? Do you look after yourself?
Yeah, look, I think I just again, I just agree fully with what Lex just said. But the so looking after yourself is really important. You know, those of us that have been through the mill a few times, we luckily, you know, for me, I've got a great organisation behind me. So we had. I've regularly used throughout my career the services of professional psychologists. It's a strength to do that, because if you're looking after yourself, then you are in a much better position to help others. So I had a psychologist dedicated to my team of myself and then my deputy chiefs, and right throughout the season. And yeah, that was really important, because you need, when you do have to do the job as Lex described, then it doesn't mean that you're not feeling it. It doesn't mean that it's not having a really dramatic impact on you, and having somebody to support you and look after you that understands, you know, the normal set of human emotions that you go through is truly important. And I found that to be one of the most powerful things that I could have done, and utilizing the resources of your organization to help make all of the arrangements go as well as possible. But so looking after yourself, because then if you do that, as you said, Susan, then you can invest in others, and it's really important. And I found it really challenging, you know, to know when others needed you and when they needed you to leave them alone. And getting that bit right is really difficult, because as a leader you feel that you need to be there for everybody, but quite often they don't need you at a particular time. They just need to gather around each other and do that. So again, having that psychologist supporting me helped guide me for how I could best look after others, and having that professional support. You know, I was able to say, hey, I feel like I need to do something here, and I was able to get that sort of guidance and advice. So that was really important. But the thing for me, because I did get a bit of criticism that I was showing too much emotion. I found I couldn't help it because I was feeling that. But I still did my job, you know, and that was my measure. Did I still do my job? But it was very upsetting for me, and even though I wasn't absolutely close to all of these people, to the same level my direct staff were, you do get this amazing, you absorb this anguish and pain from everybody around you, and it just washes over you. So I found that to be a real challenge, and then being able to step up and do exactly what we need to do is important at the same time.
Chris, tell the story about when your friend picked you up. Yeah,
so this was after the Black Saturday experience. Was at these community meetings, and people again were asking me unanswerable questions, and I was very much as an incident controller in that command and control function. And then I did that 9 days. It's the hardest 9 days I think I've ever had at work, and I did that 9-day rotation, and then I got back to the normal build. And of course, for those of us, so in a land management agency, we're in command and control while we're doing our fire response, but we're meant to be normal human beings when we're not. And what happened to me is I didn't check out of command and control mode. So I was treating people in my normal work as if, you know, I need you to do this, I need you to do this now, and blah, blah, blah. And I actually stayed in command and control mode when I shouldn't. And it wasn't until a friend of mine sort of gave me a metaphorical slap around the face and said to me, who the hell do you think you are speaking to me like this? And it was just that moment that I realised that my brain had sent me down a pathway to try and my psychologist later sort of said to me, that was your brain trying to protect you from a range of really distressing experiences. And I didn't realise, but I'd suppressed all of those memories, and it all came flooding back in that moment. And I found that that was really tough, and had a really strong reaction. But again, I was able to get professional support and work through all of those feelings. But yeah, I was really surprised, because I thought I was doing really well. I thought I'd nailed this leadership through a really challenging space, but I didn't. And I didn't know that I didn't until somebody triggered that for me, Susan.
Was that helpful for you to have somebody actually tap you on the shoulder and say, you may not be seeing this, Chris, but this is what I'm seeing? Yeah,
absolutely. I think I would have, I'm not sure, I could have got really unwell if that was about 6 or 7 weeks after that I'd bottled it up for that long. And I'm not sure. I may have got sick without somebody seeing that there was something different about the way I was acting and behaving, and called me out. And so that's that bystander thing, if you see it, say it. That would be my goal, because you don't know what you don't know. You don't know when your brain does these things to you. It sort of, you don't know it's doing it, and it just needs occasionally something to trigger that understanding. So,
Lex, what about you and looking after yourself? You've been through all of these incredible things. What have you done to look after yourself?
Yeah, that's a good question, Susan. So I suppose the big significant learning curve for me was Linton. And that was, the loss of 5 firefighters. We were managing the different family relationships. We had 5 funerals to arrange to make sure that they were all of the same standard, if I can put it that way, so that every death, every member was seen in the same light, as important as the other. And then we had a large memorial service with the Governor General and the PM and the Governor and the Premier and every other person.
Recorded live on ABC Radio.
Recorded live and so forth. And I remember 2 weeks after the initial event, driving up the Geelong Road towards Melbourne, and I just lost it. I pulled over to the side of the road and I just broke down in tears. And I remember ringing the then chair of the CFA board in an absolute state. And I didn't know what was wrong with myself. So I went and saw a counsellor immediately. And I used that experience to, if I move forward now to Black Saturday, when Black Saturday happened, one of the things I did within the first couple of days was again reconnect with that counsellor who I had confidence in, and just talking about what I was going through. But more so, I then spoke to my leadership team and leadership teams, leaders within fire brigades, the volunteers. And I was telling people quite openly, as the regional manager, regional director, I'm speaking to a counsellor on a regular basis. Don't be ashamed to say to people, I'm getting support. And what I found that actually gave other leaders, the other subordinate leaders and leaders of fire brigades, to actually say, well, if it's good enough for the boss, he's given us license to say, I'm not okay, right? I actually need to talk to somebody. So I see that as a strength, a very strong strength, when a leader says, you know what, I need to talk to somebody because, I'm not superhuman. I am a human, and I need to be able to, express how I feel and have an independent person talk to me and go through that counselling process. So for weeks after the initial Black Saturday event, 10 o'clock every morning at the Lilydale office, I would meet with the staff and we would do a debrief on the night's activities, what's planned for the next day. But we always started off with how you were travelling. And I would say quite openly, I've got an appointment this afternoon with the counsellor. I'm talking to the counsellor. And my team, my leadership team members told me, weeks and months after that they felt empowered to be able to say that to brigades, and we were putting that out there quite openly. Because, in those days, even it was a very male-dominated environment in the leadership ranks, and you know, blokes don't go crazy, blokes don't suffer this stuff. Well, I've got to tell you, blokes do suffer this stuff, and it's leaders that actually give other leaders license to say you need some support.
Okay, very good. What about families, Lex? You know, at times like this, what do you think is most important for families? What are they looking for from agencies?
The first thing the families will start asking is why. What happened? How did it happen? And one of the things that I've done on each of the occasions where I've been the leader and there's been a loss is I've appointed somebody to be that contact person from the agency. So, for example, at Linton, we had five firefighters that had lost their lives. I immediately that night, when I arrived at the office, appointed 5 family contact officers. It was the first time that it occurred in CFA. And that
excuse me, I think you were way ahead of your time.
Oh, thanks, Susan.
You were way ahead of your time in doing that. How did you know to do that?
I knew that. I think it was because of my policing background. You know, that when somebody when a family member loses a family member, they need someone to cling on to ask those questions. Might not know the answers, but can facilitate getting an answer or getting advice on that. And so the family contact officer, as I call it, has since been put into place with every other death following Linton. And that person then followed with that family from day one through to the funerals, post the funerals. So the families didn't have to seek answers from various other people. It's one person to go to who they built confidence with and they would talk to. But also that person will give you intel to say how that family is coping or what issues there are. And, you know, even through the inquest, the Linton inquest and so forth, those family contact people were there for the families.
And without, I don't wish to sound disrespectful, but do you think agencies are a bit worried about tippy-toeing around and not, you've talked...
Yeah, you know, my experience is that the worst thing you can do when dealing with a family who have gone through grief and suffered the loss of a loved one is just tippy-toe around them, because they're looking for answers. You know, yes, you've got to be sensitive, but at the same time, you've got to be there. You've got to be direct as you can with them, because whilst some news might be hard, they will appreciate that. They will appreciate that someone is being honest with them as much as possible. You won't have all the answers up front. It could take weeks, it could take months to get the right answers. But never ever not tell the truth to the family of somebody that you've lost, because you'll be found out. And that is more aggressive in the longer term than just being upfront and saying, look, this is how it is.
You might think you're protecting them, but you're actually not.
Oh, correct. Absolutely.
Yeah. And Chris, what about your experience in that regard?
Yeah, 100%. Again, Lex, spot on. Very forthright, honest and robust conversations with families, no matter how difficult it was. We appointed family contact officers. We just immediately threw sort of $10,000 into everybody's bank account, all 3 families. That was just because immediately there are stresses and pressures on families immediately, and that was not in lieu of any other payment. That was just the right thing to do, so that they didn't feel any financial stress on top of everything else that they were doing. So we immediately did that for all 3 families. The each family's need was different, but one of the things that we've done is with our internal investigations, the police investigations, coroner's investigations, is as soon as we got those results of those investigations, we shared them fully with the family, and we also gave them a face-to-face briefing and took them through the findings of the investigation unedited, as again just supporting what Lex was saying, and then trying then, because we found that each family wanted something slightly different with the funeral arrangements, about whether political figures could attend or not, whether, you know, our guards of honour and all of those things that we did were different for each family. So that family contact person was absolutely critical in making sure that we align to the wishes of all of the families, and we asked permission for everything that we did. We didn't assume that each family wanted a bunch of EM chiefs rocking up with ministers and all of that. Some did, some didn't, and yeah, you know, one of our fallen, Bill Slade, his family did want a really big celebration of the amazing life that Bill led, and you know, on top of all the other benefits, you know, the chief exec of Parks Victoria, financially, who he worked for, financially supported the family to get what they wanted, and I think that's just really important that we, you know, the fallen, they've made the ultimate sacrifice to protect community, and as well as the benefits, you know, we have death and disability insurance for our firefighters, and so all of those benefits, these were the things over and above the benefits that we just wanted to do to support the families. But we also attended, we had memorials up in Canberra and at the Victorian Parliament, and the family contact and myself attended with the families for all of those things as well. So it was just doing exactly everything we could that the family needed to help them on their journey. Yeah, so that's how we went about it.
Don't assume you know what they want, and everybody will be different. Lex, what about colleagues? Tell me about colleagues. Tell me about what you did the morning after Lenten.
Well, obviously I had the contact officers and so forth, but one of the things that I did for my own mental health, I remember it was around about 9:30 the following morning. I'd been at the office since about 10 o'clock or 10:30 the night before, because the event occurred I was first notified at 9:16 p.m. I'll never forget that time. And it was the quickest drive from Melbourne to Geelong, I can tell you. And the following morning, I hopped in my car, and there was a lot of people around the office dealing with a whole lot of issues, and I needed time out for myself. I needed my brain to have a break. So I actually drove to the Geelong City Fire Station. I parked in the backyard, and I walked into the mess room where the crew of firefighters were sitting around the mess room. And of course, they're reeling from the news still. And I walked in and I sat at the mess table. And I remember Jeff Brown was the station officer, and he looked at me and he went, "Boss, what are you doing here?" And I said to him, "I just need a cup of coffee with some of my people." And they thought, geez, the area manager's come to sit down with a shift of firefighters. But I found for myself, it was very therapeutic, if I put it that way, that I could take myself out for just an hour and clean my inbox out from my head and share my grief with people who had not been directly involved, but people who understood.
Lex is frozen, I think.
Helped me get through the issue, but also, again, gave licence to a lot of people around the Geelong area that, you know, it's okay to grieve. It's okay to grieve.
And what about you, Chris, in dealing with colleagues?
Yeah, it was a little bit more challenging. So Lex was the actual manager in charge of that team, and that's a very different responsibility from an agency chief. Yeah, I can't imagine, you know, how hard that would have been for Lex to do that, and just great admiration the fact that he did that. And I know the leaders in my team did really similar things. And for me, as the chief, was to make sure I facilitated the opportunity for staff to do that, to be together and to spend that time together and work through how they were all feeling. I struggled with that a bit because I felt like I wanted to be a part of it, but it wasn't the right thing to do at the right time. So that the psychologist that was helping me was guiding me through that, because you want, as a human being, you want to get in there and help. And the best thing for me to do was to do nothing, and that was hard because, you know, like Lex was saying, blokes want to get in and fix things. Sometimes that's not the best solution. But what I did is, and there's something really important, that those people that are directly associated with the incident, who are have a traumatic experience, and then there's all of those. So it was the incident controller who was in charge of the fire, the divisional commander, the task force leader, the crew leader. One of the things is everybody felt accountable for the losses. You know, they all shared in this accountability, and they were all carrying this feeling of, well, could I have done something differently? And would it have changed the outcome? And that's just a natural thing for people to do. So for me is, you know, I spoke to the police and crime scene investigators to the scenes, and they assessed the scenes, and I spoke to them and I got their initial reactions, and you know, without a commitment, they were saying things like this looked like a tragic, unforeseeable sort of thing that happened, and it was about sharing everything that I knew with the team to ensure that they weren't carrying this feeling of responsibility unnecessarily, you know, because sometimes bad stuff happens, and we've got to take the lessons and we've got to learn from that. But yeah, this feeling that everybody wants to be accountable for it is a real issue, and some that as leaders we have to deal with. But a couple of days later, I spoke to every single member of the task forces that were involved. So it was, you know, 3 lots of 25 phone calls that I made. Sometimes I just left a message and said, ring me if you want to speak to me. But we went through that, both myself and Matt Jackson from PV, and I spoke to everybody that was feeling that they were directly impacted. Some people wanted to speak, some didn't. And I visited the work centres, all of the work centres, and sort of spoke to the people that were feeling impacted, even though they weren't directly involved in the incident themselves. So it was a big investment, but yeah, I think the lesson for me is knowing when to do stuff and when not to.
It's interesting. I was thinking back to the fires you mentioned up at Ferny Creek, and you know, really, in those days, firefighters were responsible for putting the wet stuff on the hot stuff. End of story. You know. And again, another battle I remember I had was with the chief officer at the time, and I said, "You will meet me at Ferny Creek at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning, because people want to see you." So you mentioned different levels of leadership. You know, you're the chief officer, Lex at the time was the area manager. But people do want to see that top leader.
Yeah.
And they want to see that top leader show care and empathy. It's a slightly different situation, and I don't want to focus on it, but I know it's something you've got experience with, Chris. What about when there's been a suicide in the workplace?
Yeah. So, yeah, look, I think it's important we talk about that. Just this year, I went to a funeral in Upper Murray for James Penman, Pang, one of our summer firefighters that the black dog got the better of, and that illness took his life. And that was probably one of the most challenging things, you know, to see such an amazing young man that was so popular, and to realise that mental illness can have such a dramatic impact, and the impacts that has more broadly in the community. Yeah, that was really challenging to just be there and be with the family and the friends and the colleagues of Pang. But there was so much. There was so much. As well as regret and grief, there was so much love and support and all of that around too, which was really important for all of us that were a part of that, and felt privileged to be a part of that. But it does really sharpen your focus, and it's really important that we talk about suicides, because you know, a lot of emergency services workers, and even in my own agency, around 11% of my own agency have signs of PTSD, which is consistent with police and CFA and all of that sort of stuff. And you wouldn't think in forest firefighter you are the same first responder as you are as an AMBO or a copper or something like that. But this constant working in this area of danger and stress and in impactful situations really does have lasting effects on emergency service workers across the spectrum. And yeah, if not looked after, if you don't lean into those things, then it can result in mental illness, can result in fatalities, and so often, and way too often does. So yeah, this is why I was really keen to be a part of this, because, you know, listening to Lex and the conversations that we're having today is, for God's sake, if you're not feeling right or you're seeing somebody's not right, just go in and ask the question, and ask if people are okay, and genuinely ask those questions, because it can make a massive difference.
Lex, what do you think, in your experience, has been most helpful in helping people heal from situations like this that you've experienced, you know, in the workplace?
I'm not quite sure the word heal's correct. You know, yeah, cope. Cope's probably better, because the reality is, once you've faced trauma, you will always remember that trauma. It's how you actually deal with that trauma, and how your thought processes deals with it on a day-to-day process. And it's, again, for me, I know, for example, that there are certain places where I go, I know I'll get a chill up the spine. If I go to Linton, I know straight away it will have an impact on me, so I can prepare myself for that. If I drive down Rosanna, Lower Road, Rosanna, where the shooting occurred, I know what will happen with me. I don't avoid it, but I know, I've put it in my mind, okay, this is how you deal with it. When I meet some people from those Linton days, I know that I'll have that connection. And I've found in the past that when I'm dealing with people who've actually been in those situations that I'm aware of, talking again quite openly about it with them. Don't try to suppress it or avoid it, because often there'll be an indicator they want to talk about it again and again. Because, you know, in the emergency services sector, we have a great saying, don't we, about war stories. We all have a war story. Well, a war story is actually a way for me and for others, I think, to actually cope with dealing with the stresses that one's been through. And by talking about it, it's actually a coping mechanism for me. And I've seen that with others as well. So, you know, never be ashamed or try to not, or try to.
Unfortunately, Lex is frozen again with his mouth
Next
open.
generation. And that's important.
Okay. One of the things that the Emergency Services Foundation is working on at the moment, in fact, I've got a grant application to submit today, is around establishing a lived experience network for people across the sector, that they can catch up with. The model that we're using is with a small group of people, and they can have a catch-up group with a mentor. So fingers crossed we get the grant to be able to see that through. What about either of you, Lex, maybe to start with, what about sensing the signs in an individual, you know, that they're not doing so well? You know, what do you do as a leader, particularly if people, you know, blokes, and they're saying, you know, they're that, you know, I'm right, mate, we'll be right, mate, I'm okay. How do you sort of pick up those signs and symptoms?
One, I've got a couple of examples, and no name, no factual, but the way people talk, the way that they engage with you, whether they start to shut themselves off, or whether their speech becomes more direct and, for want of a better term, aggressive. You can actually see it, I believe, often in a person's face. Look at their eyes, and I've seen that in a number of people where, oh, they're not, something just tells you that in the gut feeling through your experience, something is not right here. Or I've known of people that have not sought counselling or not sought some assistance from another person, and you can just tell they're not coping that well until you know, eventually they need that support. And I've had that on a couple of occasions. And I think it comes through experience, looking at body language, even engaging with a bit of an understanding about how home life's going at the moment, their shortness in the way they're talking, their abruptness, or in actual fact, if they withdraw from the group, or if they withdraw from the leadership team, something's not right. If their behaviour in any way changes, something's causing it.
What about you, Chris? What have you noticed?
I again agree with Lex, but I reckon some people are really good at hiding how they're feeling, and they get really practiced at that. And you know, my experience, some people have put forward a really positive attitude and all of those things to avoid talking about stuff. So it's not always easy to pick up on those things. And I know just through experience, some people that have self-harmed, people have said to me that they had no idea because they were feeling so positive in the lead up to that taking that act, and that was strange. I'm not sure if that's common, but certainly all of the things that you would think don't always appear to be true, that sometimes you can be lulled into a false sense of security of people putting on an act and pretending that they're okay, or you know, who knows how the human mind works. I'm not that experienced. I've certainly discussed this with psychologists, but for me, I think what we try and understand and do is that there's no beginning and end for this support that's needed for individuals. It's long term, and it may take years of support, and having well-being at the forefront of your mind, having human beings and the people that work at the forefront of your mind and everything that you do, and establishing, you know, we have reach out programs, we have a whole bunch of people trained in mental health first aid. We have a whole range of people that are out there to be first point of contact, and then all of the various services we provide. But it doesn't begin and end, and I think the key for me is constantly constantly checking in. And even when, and I had this last week, I did a work centre briefing, and people saying that they've got welfare fatigue, but that was one person in the work centre, and sometimes it's not listening to that, and it's saying that there may well be people in that work centre that do need that support or are being quiet. So we're going to continue to do those things. So long-term investment. And both personally and bring the resources of your organisation to bear on that as well. But don't think that there is a beginning, a middle and an end. It's an ongoing level of support that we know we'll have to provide for as long as it needs to be provided.
Okay. So, Lex, how are memorials and ceremonies helpful?
Memorials and ceremonies I found are very important. They're very important for the families, that their loved ones who have been lost are recognised by the organisation or by the state as being a contributor to the organisation. And it can be very positive for the families, whilst at the same time very tough for the families. It's also for the work colleagues, a way where work colleagues can pay homage and honour to those that have been lost. And I'm a strong believer that the importance of ceremonial, those things that create a sense of culture in an organisation, that sense of belonging, where the family, and even now in my current role, we talk about the policing family, where we never forget those who have been lost through either work tragedy or through ill health. The families, for years and years and years after, remain connected to the organisation. And that reminds them of the efforts and the work of their loved one that's no longer with us. So ceremonies and memorials are critical, I believe. And a memorial, for example, is a place where a family, loved ones can go to remember. And as you'd be aware, Susan, we built the memorial at Geelong West, and we built the memorial in the Linton Forest out of the same stone. And that was very symbolic, and even to today, where there's that connection between the community, the location, and the 5 families. And that's very critical still to this day.
I'm conscious of the time. I've got a couple of other questions. An event happens on a day, and that's a date in time. But I know, for example, with Linton, that event, in terms of the ongoing ramifications for the organisation, went on for a number of years, as you go through inquiries and things like that. What's your thoughts on that, and, sort of managing that through as well? I mean, Chris, you're involved in 11 inquiries at the moment, for goodness sake.
Yeah.
It's just hard. There's one part of it, and then there's another part of it.
Yes, I call it the festival of inquiries, Susan. Look, there's inquiries are really important because we're all accountable at the end of the day, and the community have a right to know that we've discharged our responsibilities appropriately and well. And so for me personally, there are 11 different inquiries that I'm subject to. So, but the same thing as we described with the investigations and inquiries and those types of things, is just to be completely open, transparent, and forthright, and share with affected and impacted people and support impacted people. So, for instance, with some of the investigations into our deaths this year, we made sure that every single staff member had good representation and were able to be supported through writing statements and making sure that they were that it was their statement, that they owned it and it belonged to them, and they said exactly what they wanted to say, and we didn't in any shape or form endeavour to shape or influence or do anything other than for them to say exactly what their experience was. So inquiries are a reality of the modern world, and I've always said, and I say this to my team regularly, that you come to work, you do the very best job you can, you make the very best decisions that you can with the information that you have, and then you back yourself. And you know whether you're a professional volunteer firefighter, we've always got to remind that these firefighters in our CFA are professional at what they do. They just happen to not get paid for it, and they put themselves in harm's way in the same way my people do, and they will be held to account on every decision that they make should things go dramatically wrong. And that's where your training, your development, your investment in your people and your trust in your people to make good decisions will hold them in good stead. But occasionally human beings make mistakes as well, and I'm not suggesting that in any of the losses that we had this year, but in other experiences they do, and that's okay because we're human. We won't always get it right. We may be under stress or pressure and make a poor decision, and even then it's just as important, and if not more important, to back your people. Stand beside them, stand behind them, understand, encourage that openness, that honesty, that transparency, but be there for them. And what they did in a moment doesn't make them a good or a bad person. It's just what happened at the moment. And we talk about their actions and the things that occurred rather than them as people, and disconnecting those two things because they're not the same. And it's really important, because then if people are judged to have performed poorly, doesn't mean that they're a bad person. It means that in the moment, at that time, a decision was less than ideal, but it doesn't reflect on them as an individual. It's really important you disconnect those two things.
Absolutely. Lex, do you want to add anything to that? I've got a couple more questions.
No, I think Chris has summed that up pretty well, Susan.
So, as a leader, can you prepare for something like this, what you guys have been through?
I'll go first. Look, my experience tells me you can actually prepare yourself for it, understanding that these things in the emergency management sector, by the very definition, that those of us that are in this sector, when the balloon goes up, we go forward where the community go backward. They retreat out of the danger, but we send our people into the danger. So by preparing for it, understanding that things do go wrong, and sadly as it is, the truth is there will be another emergency service worker's death at some point in the future in some agency. It's about preparing yourself that within your own agency and your own team, that you have the systems in place and the processes in place that in the event that it happens, you can automatically do a number of things, i.e. family contact officers, media, making sure your reporting lines are correct, making sure that people are briefed, and that if you're working as a leader in a team, or if you're in a team with a leader, that you actually be upfront and talk about these issues ahead of an event occurring. And I know at my little group level at the moment, preparing for this summer, that my management team is already talking about making sure that we've got all the health and safety issues in place. But what if something happens? Who will do what, etc., etc. So you can prepare to a degree, but you can't prepare you know, how you'll feel emotionally, but you know you're going to have some emotions running through the team and yourself.
So, just in finishing up, what do you want people to take away from this conversation? Here's two people with incredible experience and wisdom, lived experience that, you know, can be shared and that wisdom can be harnessed. Lex, what do you want people to take away from this conversation?
For me, it's probably, if you are a leader, be prepared to lead, be prepared to be honest with people and upfront, and make sure that you've got your right systems in place and your support networks in place, that in the event that something does happen, you've got that counselling service on tap 24/7 during an event, that your communication with your team is very clear. Start thinking about who can perform the role of the family liaison, who can perform the role of other types of tasks that need to be done, but also as a leader, what support have you got in place in the event that something happens, that you've got that immediate support so you can provide that leadership. So I think they're probably the keys for me, Susan.
And what about you, Chris?
Yeah, I think Lex summarised that really well, but for me is look after yourself in those situations. Look after your leadership team because they're the ones that will get you through to the other side of whatever the other side looks like, and that will be different under every circumstances. But yeah, I don't think you can prepare emotionally for these things because each one of these things will impact you differently, and you don't know how you'll react emotionally, but professionally you certainly can prepare and should, and you know, bring the resources of your organisation behind you. But your leaders are absolutely critical. Look after your leaders, look after yourself, look after your leadership team, because if they're not in a good shape, then you've failed before you get past the start line. So that would, in addition to what Lex has said, rather than repeat what Lex has said, that would be my addition to that.
All right, well, I might bring it to a close here. Look, all I can say is thank you to the two of you. You've been incredibly generous and with your personal insights, and I think there's been a lot to learn. So for those listening, if there's somebody that you know who has missed this conversation but might like to hear it, we have recorded it. It will be on ESF's website tomorrow under the news section, and I will put out an impact newsletter as well. So just a reminder, based on what the guys have said today, it's always good to talk to someone if this discussion has brought up memories or emotions for you. I know some of it did for me. Take care of yourself, get in touch with a friend, a peer, or a support service if you need to. So thank you for joining us today. Stay safe and take care. Somebody's put something on the chat there. Let me just see what that is before we go. Great session. So I think a lot of people will be saying that too. So thank you guys, and we'll say goodbye now.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.